Hello. Welcome along to episode 245 of Adventures in Pop. My name's Simon Jacobs, as usual. And the keen-eyed and eared amongst you will probably think, no, he's made a mistake. It's episode 246 now, but it isn't, because episode 245 is a bit of a special. It is an interview that was held between a lovely chap called Indy Over 50, based in Sydney, Australia, and myself. It's an interview that I've cut into three parts, and welcome along. This is part two. So I'm calling them all episode 245. This is part two. And if you've missed part one, well, you've got a choice, really. You can go back and listen to it, go and watch straight away. It's about 20 minutes long, maybe just a little bit more, because these are slightly longer episodes. Or you can watch this one and then go back to number one, because I don't really think it matters in what order you catch these three episodes that are part of one interview. So it doesn't matter if you start at the beginning, start in the middle, start at the end. Don't mind at all. Just go and enjoy. And what I'm going to do is hand you over straight away to John, who is our Indy Over 50 interviewer, if you like. He's the man who's made this all happen, based in Sydney, Australia. And, welcome to part two. You take care. Bye-bye.
We've talked about this, the development of your music passion from youth, your introduction to the piano, your experimentation, your creativity that came unlocked through that, forming the collaborations, two of them now, and then releasing your solo work. Being locked in a safe cave during COVID and able to focus on the production and your solo work. One of the things I ask of Indie Over 50 artists is, where was the day job in this? Have you been fully employed and engaged as a musician through your career,
No,
or did
I
you move?
wish, one of the things that I think happens when you reach this age, you look back and you think, oh, why wasn't I doing this 30 years ago in this way? Why wasn't I pushing it? And of course, the answer is I had a career, and my career was, I started out working in a record shop when I left university, which was much to the horror of my parents. I have to say that, it's like, what on earth? You've got a degree and you're a sales assistant in a record shop. But I don't know if you know from the 70s, 80s and beyond. I mean, Our Price Records in United Kingdom was a chain of record shops that grew really, really quickly and then got bought by WH Smiths.
Mhm.
But at one point, we had about three or 400 record shops up and down the country. There were little high street shops, and because it was a chain that was growing very rapidly, I got promoted quite quickly. I used to say to people, if you join this record chain and you don't get arrested and you do have a pulse, you'll probably be promoted. So I became, after about a year or so, I was the manager of a record shop with a team, and at last my parents could relax because they could tell their friends that I was a manager. So
You're a young executive,
that
yeah.
was all good. Um, and I absolutely loved it. I loved working in the record shop. I stayed there for 10 years. I was meant to stay just for Christmas. I stayed for 10 years, got moved into the head office, became a trainer, started a career in HR, moved to Waterstones, the bookshops eventually, that were also owned by WH Smiths.
Mhm.
Um, I was the HR director there for a few years. It was a very good time for Waterstones. I did pretty well out of it because there was quite a lot of um, shenanigans, moving in and out of other companies. And as a director, I ended up being, remunerated just for staying with the company as they went from this, merger and this acquisition. So it was the right place at the right time. And then
Mhm.
at the beginning of this century, left Waterstones and became a management consultant, and then freelance management consultant. That went on until COVID, really. And
Yes.
as COVID happened, that business died and didn't ever recover. And I was, I was not that upset about it, I think, because I just thought maybe at this stage, I don't need to work that hard and I can concentrate on other things. And when COVID, eventually evaporated, I didn't try very hard to get it back on track. And
Mhm.
then a couple of years ago, I sort of officially retired.
Yes. Well
Now,
done.
it's tricky though, isn't it? Because I think you what you come up against, it's almost like the elephant in the room all the time is okay, so you're now, you're now 60 plus, you're doing this stuff. How lovely for you. What a nice hobby. And I'm so delighted that you've got something to keep you interested. And I'm thinking, no, 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 this is really serious. And so I think yeah, I think there are definitely people who think, oh, how sweet, he's doing some nice music things. And I'm thinking, no, this is really seriously what I want to be doing. But whether I can actually, achieve any level of success is really doubtful because I think your age is a real issue in this industry. I'm sure it's one of the most ageist industries, on the face of the planet, really, which is if you are to be successful, you're supposed to be, 23, I think, or and probably female at the moment. But let's park that. There are some things that are impossible, but it is a young person's business, isn't it? And
More famous at the age of 23, so that's how we cover Keith. So,
so I think breaking into something at this age is really difficult, and particularly if all of your musical influences are from from an earlier era, from when you grow up and all the music you like. So it's quite difficult to.
do you think the challenge here, though, is age, or is it purely supply and demand?
Okay, how would you characterize supply and demand? What
Oh, look, one of these wonderful insights recently was that there was more music released in one day in
Oh
2024 than
yeah,
in
okay.
1989.
Mm, mm.
And you and I were there in 1989, and it was great. We had so many options, but now that floods in. So the vast wealth of opportunities for us to hear, discover new artists. Um, whilst many of us are still wed to listening to the Beatles or Led Zeppelin or David Bowie as well. So we're still got to find that in with our ears during
Yeah.
the our listening week.
Okay. It's a plus and a negative, isn't it? Because now everybody can record at home in their bedroom with minimal tech, and they can create something and they can upload it to Spotify. So suddenly millions and millions of people have access to putting their music out there. And the problem is millions and millions of people have access to putting their music, and that. So how do you? Right at a very early stage of when I started doing the YouTube videos, right from the very beginning, I think I was saying, um, you know, any idiot basically can upload stuff to Spotify. The really difficult thing, and it's still the main challenge today, is how do you cut through? How do you get anybody to hear you? And I don't know the answer to that, really. You just try different ways. You just keep on going, I think, with a sort of relentless enthusiasm. You just have to keep going and seeing if something gets picked up in some way, somewhere, somehow, because I don't have the answer to that.
I think you're 100% right. And as a result of that, from a business point of view, I think of it as marketing. Horrible word, but it
Yeah.
is about marketing. And the product itself, which is a core element of marketing, is got to be part of it. But my general reflection is the product is usually really, really good. Great quality, great production techniques. So product then becomes how do you take it to market? What's your point of difference? How do you get heard? Because
Mm.
once you are heard, and you'll know artists that have got 17 listeners per month, but they've got great songs.
Yeah. Yes.
And then similarly, you pump the coin in the right slot, and you can have thousands of listeners per month. And your comparison may be not as generous for that song, but so that marketing challenge is something that we all struggle with, I think,
I think
as artists.
it's been really problematic, and I've fallen foul a couple of times of using promotional services on Spotify that then Spotify, get very angry about. And and I've had to realize, maybe slightly the hard way, that most of those services, so to speak, are very dubious. And so I've stopped using them. And therefore it suddenly looks like I've lost half my audience, but probably some of my audience was not real in the first place. And so you've got to be so careful, I think, and not fall into that trap where you're fooling yourself that somehow, you've got these great streaming numbers, and but nobody's listening.
I've
It's
been
dangerous.
there. I've been there. It's that, yeah, it's a real challenge. And what we're seeking is engaged listeners. And you probably be across, the old playlisting versus,
Yeah,
you know, meta ads or whatever the case might
yeah.
be, or do you do it through content? And I think with content, it probably opens the conversation now for something that you've just spoken about. Taking your adventures in pop and creating this YouTube vehicle, catching an early wave, I think, by identifying that trend. So I'd love to have a bit of a chat and understand what the inception of that was and part of that journey for you as well.
So with the videos, I just thought this is an opportunity to talk about, basically to promote each single that I release, being really granular about it. Every time I release a single, gives me the opportunity to talk about the making of that song, play a bit of it, probably then preview the whole video. So I can, it might pop up in a couple of episodes, and then I'm on to the next one. Because the other thing I learned very early on in terms of marketing was releasing a whole album, just 12 tracks, is a complete waste of time, because if nobody's heard of you, they're not really going to sit down and think, well, I'm just going to spend 45 minutes with this person I've never heard of, and see what they're like. It just doesn't happen. So
Unless you're Taylor Swift and they'll line up at midnight, Central
yeah,
Time, then the new album's downloaded.
yeah. So I did release the whole of the first album just one day, just thinking I've released my album, and then nothing happened, of course. Um, so then I learned that you have to keep releasing single after single, and you just keep it going with as much regularity as you possibly can do to keep the Spotify algorithm, etc. But so the YouTube videos were partly to talk about each track as it came out, but also I thought there are plenty of YouTube videos talking about production. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to talk about compression and which plugin you're going to use for the best EQ and blah blah blah. I was much more interested in talking about, where does an idea come from? How
Mm.
do you, how do you know if you've, how do you know when you've finished producing a track? How do you, um, what happens if you can't get a good chorus? You've got a great verse and the chorus is terrible. Can you just take out the chorus and slot in a new chorus? Do you need to have a chorus? All those things. What's the structure of your song? So all of those things I found much more interesting to talk about than to get into the real production stuff. And then I've added to those subjects, some other videos where I talk about pop music in the news. So, for example, there were a couple of times when it's been quite interesting talking about Ed Sheeran and his court cases where he's been accused of plagiarism. So that was a subject I got quite interested in, because I just thought Ed Sheeran is basically making these fairly bland songs, and anyone can probably hear anything in them, because they're so sort of you know universal
Well, they're like many songs. They're four chords. There's the
yes.
C,
And
G,
did anybody
combination.
copyright those four chords? It's like so. I found that really quite interesting. So there's been a few discussions about, people getting into copyright issues. I've talked a little bit about my frustrations with Spotify and YouTube, and so talking about one of the things I think I wanted to try and do with Adventures in Pop was also just to be very honest about what was working and what was not working for me. So when I had a little breakthrough, I would talk about it. When I hit a brick wall, I would talk about that as well. So I wanted to be able to share the journey, if you like, of of being this age, an independent um, pop music maker on Spotify, and all the ups and downs that kind of went with it, and then I've added to that sort of observation. Sometimes there was a an episode recently where I looked at the UK album chart, and to my genuine sort of surprise, in the top 100 UK albums a few months ago, I was looking at the number of albums that have been in the chart for over a year, and it was over 50 of them. Um,
Huge.
and actually, since then, if anything, it's got worse. It's probably about 60 out of 100 have been in the charts for over a year, and many of them over 5 years, and some of them over 10 years. And I was trying to, so my conclusion from that was we're in a bit of a pickle. There isn't enough new music, and the people who are listening to and downloading and streaming music are going back to the classics all the time. And there's, obviously there are many classics that are lovely and worthwhile, and it's fantastic. But what about new music? It was like realizing that it's almost like realizing that what Spotify has done, I think, is just make the peak of those people who are really successful even more successful. So you're either unbelievably successful or you don't exist. And it seems like there's very little in between. So for the classics, for the Elton Johns and Taylor Swifts and Ed Sheerans and Adele's and all the rest of it, Spotify and the industry has been very good to them, and they have done unbelievable business. And now you add to that, in this country, Oasis reformed and have done some mega gigs, and guess what? In the album chart,
I'll be there. Yeah.
three of their albums are in the top five again, and they've all been in the charts for 10 years, and on it goes. So you're either spectacularly successful, or the window seems to be even smaller to join that group.
I do think it comes back to that concept of our listening ears for a week is 100 minutes or 1,000 minutes or whatever it is. And we're so chock full of, the heritage catalog that we love. And
Yes.
it's imposed on us because we're listening to it in the lift or in the shopping mall. And then we're making some proactive choices. But we can also just fall back to, those classic hits we love or those. And so finding the space and the time to discover new, as we were discovering new music in our age, we would never want to listen to much stuff that was older than 10 years. It was
I think that's
really old.
absolutely right. Absolutely right. And
So
yes,
our ability to be introduced and interest in engaging with new music was so much greater